In my last video, I began addressing the book Loneliness, Human Nature and the Need for Social Connection. Addressing the loneliness epidemic, a clear social issue, the authors, Cacioppo and Patrick, focus almost exclusively on the lonely individual and his or her cognitive distortion, ultimately advocating that such an individual see a cognitive behavioral therapist if he or she is unable to handle their problems on their own in potential continued social isolation. The main explicit reason Cacioppo and Patrick give for this emphasis is that distorted cognition, or distorted social cognition more specifically, although it may originate from loneliness, can lead to defensive behaviors that in turn can cause further loneliness, namely because of how other people may find those behaviors unpleasant. To reiterate from the authors, page 34. Once this negative feedback loop starts rumbling through our lives, others may start to view us less favorably because of our self-protective, sometimes distant, sometimes caustic behavior. This in turn merely reinforces our pessimistic social expectations. Now others really are beginning to treat us badly, which seems like adding insult to injury, which spins the cycle of defensive behavior and negative social results even further downhill. However, in later passages, the authors make it clear it is not just about distorted social cognition and the defensive behaviors that follow. No, it is not just that. It is a matter of selfishness. Page 215. The motivational lesson implicit in loneliness is this. Whereas kind and generous behavior leads to social acceptance and the healthful feeling of connection, selfish antisocial behavior leads to physical decline and the disruptive pain of social isolation. Page 216. We have seen that feelings of isolation can cause declines in executive control and self-regulation that lead to impulsive and selfish behavior. Again, the original premise was page 15. Evolution shaped us not only to feel bad in isolation, but to feel insecure, as in physically threatened. In other words, while the authors begin their book claiming that these negative reactions to loneliness are leftover evolutionary adaptations literally hardwired in the brain, towards the end of the book, the lonely individual becomes guilty of selfishness for those same responses. And again, we are talking about a sense of isolation and social rejection that can disrupt our very immune systems and be as damaging as obesity or smoking. A broad societal level phenomenon that supposedly impacts millions of individuals in the US alone. Importantly, the exact point at which the authors incorporate this language, selfishness, is immediately preceded by the following passage, page 214. Whereas apes spend 10% of their waking hours grooming one another, humans laugh at the boss's unfunny jokes. We also practice kindness by laughing at the sometimes goofy jokes of children, the very old, or the mentally challenged. We curry favor with our wealthy or socially prominent acquaintances, but if we are truly socially attentive, we also change the subject the moment even the humblest listener shows signs of discomfort. When our flight hits an air pocket and the plane suddenly drops, we don't release the tension and promote group cohesion by sexually embracing our seatmate, but we may crack a joke. The unconscious and genetically biased objective in all these behaviors is the maintenance of group cohesion. What certainly appears explicit here is that the reason the authors view the self-protective or defensive behaviors of the lonely as selfish is because those behaviors are opposed to the cohesion of the group. Furthermore, given the context here, the obvious additional implication in relation to the author's conclusion is that you, as a lonely individual, if you cannot work past your cognitive distortions and negative behaviors on your own, are simply being selfish if you do not go see a cognitive behavioral therapist. The previous passage can also be compared to the following note about the purpose of the book from the first chapter. Page 19. I want to demonstrate the many ways in which loneliness serves as a new window on who we are as a species. I want to use our recent research findings, woven together with an evolutionary framework, to start trying to change our culture's lopsided view of human nature, its focus on the individual in isolation as the measure of all things. Implicit here, in the comparison of both excerpts, page 19 and page 214, it would seem, is the idea not just that the individual is not the measure of all things, but rather the inverse, that it is the group that is the measure of all things. This would certainly fit with the clear overall message of the book, that loneliness, albeit a social problem, is exclusively the lonely individual's responsibility or duty to deal with, even in potentially continued isolation. And if the individual cannot fix themselves, that is the juncture at which they are allowed to reach out for help. Again, in the form of submission. Submission to the CBT therapist, a potentially controlling and manipulative professional, and their personality, value system, self-image, personal preferences, and attitudes. To borrow once again from the presumption of psychiatric expertise and its descriptions of the mental health professional and their nature. Put another way, the previous passage about group cohesion becomes a directive for the lonely to step in line. At no point in time is there any possibility that the greater society has any role to play in this social phenomenon. Even as the authors admit, again from page 214, if we are truly socially attentive, we also change the subject the moment even the humblest listener shows signs of discomfort. If loneliness is such a broad social issue, why is there absolutely no discussion of the non-lonely treating the lonely in this manner, or of any other general call for kindness and understanding? No, because as lonely individuals, page 34, others may start to view us less favorably because of our self-protective, sometimes distant, sometimes caustic behavior. Here, for example, there is no thought to the idea of being more accepting and understanding of defensive behaviors. And by the absence of such discussion, what you ultimately get, I would argue, as far as the author's perspective, is that your value is exclusively set at what you can provide for society. And as such, there can be no thought to society giving or providing for you as an individual. For the mental health industry and its allies as a whole, and Cacioppo is most certainly an ally given his advocacy for the medical model of mental disorders and CBT. This is the consistent perspective you get, even when dealing with a societal level problem. It can all be boiled down to you having to fix yourself, and if you can't, of course, that's when you have to submit to the authority and expertise of the mental health industry professional. It always must be about the individual, their cognition, and their behavior, all viewed, of course, through the lens of pathology. This is also paired with the philosophical view, especially innate to CBT, that the individual or potential client's feelings are entirely subjective and do not match reality. Concerning the sheer number of lonely individuals in our society. Page 5. Our research in the past decade or so demonstrates that the culprit behind these dire statistics is not usually being literally alone, but the subjective experience known as loneliness. Let's not talk about the fact that individuals, in many objective ways, are more isolated from each other and atomized in our current age. Paired with this is the usual discussion that the individual constructs their own realities. Page 178. The same experience can be a challenge or a nightmare, depending on how we frame it. The same glass, half empty or half full. Page 156. Loneliness is a state of mind that puts your head front and center. By engendering fearful, negative cognitions, it allows the mind to interfere with the various forms of resonance that might otherwise flow very naturally into social connection. Page 176, under the heading Mind Over Matter, you get the reference to both positive illusions and Shakespeare. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. You also get the following. Ideally, the narrative we construct aligns with objective reality well enough for us to appropriately address the problems confronting us in the real world. However, there is no guarantee. In short, for the millions of people in the U.S. who are chronically lonely enough to experience its negative impact on their stress hormones, immune function, and cardiovascular function, such that it may be hastening them to an early grave, that is 60 million people, according to the authors in 2008, those people just have to change their perspective on things. Put another way, that if you are lonely, you are just not thinking correctly. The author's work pairs well with the stereotypical Oprah Winfrey talking points. You are responsible to society and need to step in line, being positive and upbeat. And when you can't, you are just responsible for you. Society does not even owe you the same kindness you are supposed to give to it. And this is not to suggest that the individual does not have any part to play, but the suggestion is quite the opposite. Despite the author's claim that, I want to use our recent research findings to start trying to change our culture's lopsided view of human nature, its focus on the individual in isolation as the measure of all things. The authors never look past the lonely individual and his or her responsibility to society to overcome the reaction to loneliness. While identifying loneliness as a social issue, they absolutely refuse to address the problem outside the individual. And I will leave it off here until next time. I hope to see you there.